April 1969, a sandbar in Nebraska. Crews digging under a cornfield pull open the hull of the steamboat Bertrand, a Missouri River paddle wheeler that went down in April 1865. Inside, under 30 feet of silt, they find sealed tins, pickles, brandied peaches, oysters, food packed while Lincoln was alive. The National Food Processors Association later examined samples of that cargo and reported the contents were still free of microbial spoilage, still nutritionally similar to modern equivalents, though the flavor and aroma were long gone. 104 years. So here's the question that follows you into your own kitchen. If that can survive a century in a river, what exactly does the date printed on your pantry shelf actually mean? If you like food stories built only on labels, regulations, and documented cases, subscribe. Everything here comes from public records, and by the end you'll read a date code the way an inspector does. Stay with me, because the strangest case is still ahead. Start with the 4 things in your kitchen that genuinely do not spoil in any normal sense: salt, sugar, honey, white rice with an asterisk. Salt is a mineral. Sodium chloride isn't organic matter, so there's nothing in it for bacteria or mold to eat. Pure salt, kept dry, is chemically the same in 50 years as it is today. The asterisk is what manufacturers add to it. Iodized salt carries potassium iodide, and iodine is volatile. That's why iodized salt packages commonly carry a best-by date around 5 years, and why the compound is usually paired with a stabilizer like dextrose. The salt lasts forever. The added nutrient doesn't. Sugar is the same logic through a different door. Microbes need available water. Sugar grabs it and holds it so tightly that a bacterial cell dropped into dry sugar gets pulled apart by osmosis. Food scientists call this water activity. Below roughly 0.6 on that scale, nothing microbial grows. Granulated sugar sits far below that. Sugar doesn't rot, it clumps. Clumping is a texture failure, not a safety failure, and it's reversible with a slice of bread in the container or a few seconds of warmth. Honey is the famous one, and the reason is stacked defenses. Bees reduce nectar to roughly 17 or 18% water, which puts water activity in the dead zone. Honey is acidic, typically around pH 3.9, and bees add an enzyme, glucose oxidase, that slowly generates small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Low water, low pH, mild antiseptic. Archaeologists working Georgian and Egyptian sites have reported honey residues thousands of years old. And while the popular line about a perfectly edible jar from Tutankhamun's tomb is repeated far more often than it's documented, the underlying chemistry is not in dispute. Honey crystallizes, it darkens, it doesn't spoil. And here's the part millions of people get wrong. They see crystals and throw the jar out. The National Honey Board and every beekeeping extension office in the country will tell you crystallization is a sign of raw, unadulterated honey, not a defect. Warm the jar in water below 40 Celsius and it liquefies. What you should never do is give honey to an infant under 12 months. The CDC is explicit on that because honey can carry Clostridium botulinum spores, and an infant gut can let those spores establish. In an adult, they're harmless. That's the one real honey rule, and it has nothing to do with dates. White rice is the 4th, and its immortality is subtraction. Milling strips the bran and the germ, and with them the oils that go rancid. What's left is starch and a little protein, and studies out of Brigham Young University's long-term food storage work found milled white rice stored and sealed cans with oxygen removed remained acceptable after 30 years. Brown rice does the opposite. Its oil turns within months at room temperature. So why do millions of people buy these wrong? Because they buy them the way they buy yogurt. They buy small containers, they buy them often, they discard on a printed date, and they store them in flimsy bags near a stove. The eternal foods aren't fragile. Your handling is. Now the legal part, and it's stranger than most people expect. In the United States, with one single exception, the federal government does not require a date on your food at all. That exception is infant formula. Under federal law, formula must carry a use-by date, and that date is a real regulatory promise. Until that day, the product must contain the declared quantity of every required nutrient and must remain in acceptable condition. Everything else on your shelf, the crackers, the canned beans, the peanut butter, the bottled sauce, carries a date because the manufacturer chose to put it there, or because a particular state told them to. The USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service says it plainly in its food product dating fact sheet. Except for infant formula, dates are not required by federal regulations, and they are indicators of quality, not safety. Read that twice. Quality, not safety. So what do the phrases mean? There are three families and they're not interchangeable. Best if used by or best by is a peak quality statement. The manufacturer is saying flavor, color, and texture are at their best until then. Sell by is not for you at all. It's inventory instruction for the retailer, telling the store how long to display it while leaving reasonable time in your kitchen. Use by is the only phrase that leans towards safety, and even then it's the last date the maker recommends for peak quality, except on infant formula where it's binding. The confusion was measured. A 2016 study out of the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic and the Natural Resources Defense Council found the majority of American consumers were discarding food based on these phrases, believing them to be safety deadlines. In 2019, the FDA formally wrote to the food industry urging the adoption of one standard phrase, best if used by, on quality-dated shelf-stable products. Voluntary, not law. Bills under the name Food Date Labeling Act have been introduced repeatedly in Congress to force a two-phrase system, and none has passed as of this writing. Europe did something different and instructive. Under EU rules, there are two terms with two meanings. Best before is quality, use by is safety, and selling food past a use by date is an offense. That's a sharper line than anything in American law. In the United Kingdom, Tesco removed best before dates from dozens of packaged fruit and vegetable lines starting in 2018 and extended the practice through the following years, explicitly to reduce waste, on the reasoning that a shopper's eyes judge a potato better than a printer does. Then there's the second hidden layer, closed coding. Look on the top or bottom of a can and you'll often find a string that isn't a date in any human format. Manufacturers use packing codes to track plant, line, shift, and day for one reason above all others, so that when something goes wrong, they can recall a slice of production instead of a year of it. Some use a Julian date, a 3-digit day of the year, so 45 is February 14. Some run a letter for the month. Some are proprietary and unreadable without the company's key. Here's the loophole that matters to you. Because quality dates are voluntary and self-assigned, they're a marketing decision as much as a technical one. A shorter date means faster turnover, means more sales. Nobody is auditing whether that jar of pure honey really turns into a pumpkin in 2 years. It doesn't. The date is the manufacturer's opinion, printed in a font that looks like law. Almost every rule protecting your shelf-stable food was written after somebody got hurt. That's not cynicism. It's the documented pattern. July 1971. A can of vichyssoise, chilled leek and potato soup, produced by Bon Vivant Soups of Newark, New Jersey. A man in Bedford Village, New York died and his wife was gravely ill. The FDA identified botulism toxin in the soup. Inspectors examined the plant, found evidence of underprocessing, and the company was ordered to recall its entire output, more than 1 million cans across dozens of product lines. Bon Vivant did not survive the year. What did survive was the regulatory response. The FDA moved to build a comprehensive framework for low-acid canned foods, and by 1973, the regulations now sitting in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Parts 108, 113, and 114, were in force. Those rules require processors of low-acid canned foods to register their plants with the FDA, to file their thermal processes, and to keep records proving every batch received the scheduled heat treatment. The person who supervises that process has to be trained under a recognized curriculum, the Better Process Control School, run through university programs. That is why a can of green beans is one of the most tightly governed objects in your kitchen. It still isn't perfect. July 2007, Castleberry's food company in Augusta, Georgia. The FDA and CDC investigated botulism cases in Texas and Indiana traced to canned hot dog chili sauce. The recall grew to cover more than 90 product varieties made on the same lines, including store brands and, notably, some canned dog food. Investigators pointed to malfunctioning cookers, the retorts that deliver the killing heat. It was the first botulism outbreak linked to commercially canned food in the United States in roughly 3 decades, and it happened in a plant operating under the very rules born in 1973. The lesson isn't that the rules failed. It's that the rules are only as good as the equipment on the day. Dried and low-moisture foods learned their own lessons. For a long time, the assumption was that pathogens can't survive where there's no water. They can. They just can't multiply. Salmonella in a dry environment goes dormant and becomes extraordinarily heat-resistant, and it can persist for months or years. The Peanut Corporation of America outbreak, which the CDC investigated across 2008 and 2009, was traced to peanut butter and peanut paste from plants in Blakely, Georgia and Plainview, Texas. Hundreds were sickened across dozens of states, deaths were reported, and thousands of products were pulled in one of the largest recalls in American history. In 2015, the company's former chief executive, Stuart Parnell, was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, an unprecedented criminal outcome in a food safety case. That outbreak became one of the arguments that pushed the Food Safety Modernization Act, signed in January 2011, which shifted the legal posture of American food regulation from reacting to contamination toward requiring companies to prevent it, with written hazard plans and, for the first time, mandatory recall authority for the FDA. And powders are not exempt. In February 2022, Abbott Nutrition recalled certain powdered infant formulas produced at its Sturgis, Michigan facility after an FDA investigation into Chronobacter sakazakii and Salmonella complaints. The plant shut down, and the shortage that followed emptied American shelves for months. Powdered formula is not sterile. It never has been. The recall notices and FDA advisories said so directly. Shelf-stable does not mean sterile, it means stabilized. Those are different promises. Forget the date for a minute. An inspector looking at shelf-stable food runs a different checklist, and you can run the same one in the aisle. These are category rules, not brand claims. First, the container is the shelf life, not the food. A dry good sealed in a foil laminate pouch or a metal can with oxygen removed will outlive the identical food in a paper bag by decades, because the enemies are oxygen, moisture, light, heat, and pests, and only the packaging holds those off. So the first thing to look at isn't the printed date, it's what the food is sitting in. Cardboard and thin film say months. Metal, glass, and foil laminates say years. Second, read the ingredient list for the fat. Fat is the clock in almost every dry product. If the ingredient panel lists whole grain, nuts, seeds, oil, butterfat, or dried egg, the product will go rancid long before it goes microbially bad. And rancidity is an oxidation reaction that runs whether or not the package is sealed. Two products can look identical on the shelf and differ tenfold in real life, purely because one has the germ removed and one doesn't. Rolled oats versus whole wheat flour, milled white rice versus brown, same aisle, different physics. Third, check for a nutrient with a deadline. Vitamin C added to a juice, vitamin A in fortified milk powder, iodine in salt, thiamine in fortified cereal. Fortification is chemistry that decays. When a manufacturer prints a conservative date on something otherwise indestructible, it's often protecting the nutrient claim on the front of the box, not the safety of the food inside. Fourth, inspect the seam and the shape. On a can, a bulge at either end means gas, and gas means something biological or chemical is happening in there. That can is not a gamble worth taking. Deep dents on the side seam or the double seam at the rim can compromise the hermetic seal, and a compromised seal is the mechanism behind most spoiled commercial cans. A shallow dent in the flat body panel is generally cosmetic. Rust that wipes clean is surface. Rust that pits is a hole waiting to happen. On glass, look at the safety button on the lid. It should be down and it should not move. Fifth, distinguish the three phrases and act accordingly. Best buy on a shelf-stable dry good is advisory. Use by on a perishable is a boundary. Sell by is not addressed to you. Sixth, find the lot code and photograph it. This is the one habit almost nobody has and every inspector does. When a recall is announced, it's announced by lot, by establishment number, by production date range, by UPC. If you've stripped the packaging and dumped rice into a jar, you've thrown away your ability to know whether your food is the recalled food. Write the code on masking tape and stick it to the jar. Sign up for the FDA and USDA recall notifications, which are free and public. 7. Use your senses last, not first, and know their limits. Rancid fat announces itself as crayon, paint, or old nuts, and your nose is very good at it. Mold announces itself. But the dangerous organisms in shelf-stable food, botulism toxin above all, do not change the smell, the taste, or the appearance of the food in any reliable way. That's the whole reason the 1973 regulations exist. Never taste test a suspicious can to find out. Discard it sealed. February 1908. Cape Royds, Ross Island, Antarctica. Ernest Shackleton's Nimrod expedition builds a hut roughly 10 meters by 6 and stocks it. When the party leaves in 1909, they leave the stores behind, as expeditions did. Crates of tinned meat, bottled fruit, baking powder, coffee, and on the shelves, tins of butter and cases of biscuits from British suppliers of the era, packed in an age when tin plate was heavy and solder was applied by hand. That hut is still standing. The Antarctic Heritage Trust of New Zealand has been conserving Shackleton's Cape Royds hut and Scott's huts at Cape Evans and Hut Point for decades, and their conservators have cataloged thousands of individual artifacts, food among them. The trust has publicly documented finds including crates of whiskey and brandy recovered from beneath the Cape Royds hut in 2010, which were thawed and analyzed under controlled conditions before being returned. They've documented preserved tins whose labels are still legible, and a fruitcake found at Cape Adair, attributed to a Huntley and Palmer's product left by Scott's Terra Nova expedition around 1911, which conservators described in 2017 as being in excellent condition and smelling edible, though nobody was going to eat it. Why did it last? Not magic. A near-constant deep freeze, extremely low humidity, and a food chosen for exactly this. A high-fat, high-sugar, low-moisture cake in a sealed tin is one of the most stable foods humans have ever devised. The Antarctic didn't preserve those stores by accident. It provided for free and for a century the 4 conditions a modern long-term storage program tries to buy: cold, dark, dry, sealed. And the counterexample is in the same huts. Conservators have also documented tins that failed. Corrosion works through tin plate wherever moisture and salt reach it. Seams give way, contents leak and stain the shelves. Some meat tins have been found blown or perforated. So even in the best natural refrigerator on Earth, the food outlasted the container in some cases, and the container outlasted the food in others. The container is the shelf life. That principle doesn't bend for geography. There's a second strand worth putting beside it, because it comes at the same question from the opposite direction. Hardtack, flour and water, baked hard, sometimes twice, with essentially no fat and almost no moisture. Museums across the United States hold Civil War-era hardtack biscuits in their collections, some over 160 years old and still recognizably intact objects. The Hoover Presidential Library and various regimental museums have displayed them. Nobody claims they're nutritious or pleasant. What they demonstrate is the same equation the honey solves and the fruitcake solves. Remove water, remove oxygen contact, remove fat, and biology has nothing to work with. Here's the strange part. The eternal foods in every one of these documented cases are eternal for reasons that have nothing to do with modern technology. No preservatives, no irradiation, no modified atmosphere. Bees invented it. Bakers in the 15th century invented it. A sailor in 1800 already knew that the biscuit and the salt beef would outlast the fresh bread by years. What the 20th century added wasn't preservation. It was consistency and inspection, and the ability to know which batch came from which plant on which day. And conservation practice makes one more point loudly. The Antarctic Heritage Trust does not eat what it finds. Every one of those artifacts is treated as an artifact. When a story tells you that 100-year-old food was found perfectly edible, look for whether anyone actually ate it, or whether that word was doing the work of a headline. Now the money. Why does a jar of honey cost $4 in one aisle and $18 in another, when both say honey? And what actually changes inside the cheap one? The honey trade is the best documented case of substitution in the eternal foods category, because it produced criminal prosecutions. In February 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice announced the results of Operation Honeygate, an ICE Homeland Security investigations case into the transshipment of Chinese-origin honey through third countries to evade anti-dumping duties. Major American honey processors, Grobe Farms of Onsted, Michigan, and Honey Solutions of Bayonne, Texas, entered deferred prosecution agreements and paid penalties, and individuals were charged. Court documents in the wider investigation described honey that had been filtered to remove pollen, which is how origin is traced, and in some instances product blended or adulterated with syrups. The Justice Department called it one of the largest food fraud investigations in U.S. history. That's the mechanism to understand across the whole category. Cheap versions of imperishable foods usually aren't spoiled. They're diluted, or they're a different substance wearing the same word. High fructose corn syrup, rice syrup, and beet syrup are all sugars. Mixed into honey, they don't rot either. They just aren't honey, and they undercut the water activity and enzyme profile that made honey honey in the first place. Codex Alimentarius sets an international standard for honey, and the FDA has issued guidance stating that a product with added sweeteners cannot be labeled simply honey. Vanilla shows the same fork with the law drawn more crisply. The FDA maintains a standard of identity for vanilla extract in Title 21, Part 169. To be called pure vanilla extract, the product must be made with at least 13.35 ounces of vanilla beans per gallon and contain at least 35% ethyl alcohol. That alcohol is why pure vanilla extract is one of the genuinely indefinite pantry items. It's a spirit, and spirits don't spoil. Imitation vanilla is vanillin, often synthesized in a solution. It's cheap, it's legal, it's clearly labeled, and it too lasts a very long time. What you're paying for is flavor complexity, not preservation. Olive oil is the opposite lesson, the one people get backwards. Oil is not an eternal food. Extra virgin olive oil is a fruit juice with a real decline curve, and the International Olive Council sets chemical limits, free acidity and peroxide value among them, that define the grade. Investigations in Italy over the last 2 decades, including cases pursued by Italian authorities against producers over mislabeled grades, have repeatedly turned on oils blended or refined and sold as extra virgin. In your pantry, olive oil bought for the long term is a mistake regardless of price. And then there's the quiet substitution that isn't fraud at all, just economics. In dry goods, the cheap version often differs in 3 specific legal ways. Moisture content is higher because water is cheaper than product and drying costs energy. Packaging is thinner because foil laminate costs more than polypropylene film. And the pack is nitrogen flushed or not because gas flushing is a line expense. None of that appears on the front of the box. All of it decides whether your beans are good in 8 months or 8 years. So the honest economics, you are rarely paying for a food that lasts longer. You're paying for a container and a process that lets a food that could last forever actually get the chance. So build it properly. Here's what the documented long-term storage work actually supports and what it doesn't. The short list of dry staples that reach decades is narrow and specific. Milled white rice, hard red and hard white wheat, rolled oats, white flour, dry beans, pasta, sugar, salt, powdered milk that's non-fat rather than whole, and dried potato flakes. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints home storage centers, whose packaging and shelf life guidance is public and widely cited, list these staples at up to 30 years when properly packaged, and much shorter for anything containing fat. Brigham Young University and Utah State University food scientists ran multi-decade sensory and nutritional studies on canned storage staples, and the recurring finding was that the products remained safe and nutritionally useful far longer than they remain pleasant, with dry beans in particular hardening over time, so they need longer cooking or a pressure cooker. The packaging rule is 3-part and it does the heavy lifting. 1. A moisture barrier, meaning a metallized foil laminate mylar bag or a food-grade metal can, not a plastic bucket alone because plastic breathes. 2. An oxygen absorber, an iron-based sachet sized to the volume, which pulls residual oxygen down to near nothing and stops both rancidity and insect life, since insect eggs already in your flour can't hatch without oxygen. 3. A rigid outer container, a food-grade bucket or a shelving system, to stop rodents and punctures. Products with more than about 10% moisture should not be sealed with oxygen absorbers, because a low-oxygen, moist, sealed environment is the exact condition botulinum spores prefer. That's why you seal dry grain and never seal fresh or moist food this way. Temperature is the multiplier nobody respects. As a broad rule of thumb used across food science, Chemical reaction rates roughly double for every 10 degrees Celsius increase, which means a pantry at 30 degrees ages your food several times faster than a cellar at 15. A cupboard above the oven, a garage in Arizona, a shed with a metal roof. These are not storage. Under a bed in an interior room beats a garage every time. Dark matters too, because light drives oxidation and destroys riboflavin and vitamin A. Rotate, but rotate honestly. First in, first out, with the newest at the back, and a marker date written large on every container in your own handwriting, because your handwriting is the only date you can actually trust. And store what you eat. The single most common failure in home storage isn't spoilage. It's buying 50 kilos of wheat berries in a household that owns no grain mill and doesn't like the taste of whole wheat bread. On genuinely indefinite items, be relaxed and be specific. Salt, sugar, pure honey, distilled white vinegar, pure vanilla extract, cornstarch, baking soda kept dry, and hard liquor. These do not need dates. Maple syrup keeps essentially forever unopened and belongs in the refrigerator after opening because mold can grow on the surface. Canned goods, high acid like tomatoes and citrus, are best inside a couple of years for quality. Low acid like beans, corn and meats can run far longer if the seams are sound and storage was cool. And the discipline underneath all of it. Date labels are the manufacturer's opinion about flavor. Seals, seams, smell, moisture, and temperature are the facts. Learn the second set, and the first set stops running your kitchen. Here's what stays with me. Tins pulled out of a Nebraska sandbar, a fruitcake on an Antarctic shelf, honey in a clay jar older than most nations. None of it survived because of a printed date. It survived because somebody on purpose or by luck removed water, removed oxygen, removed heat and light, and then left it alone. Everything since has been us adding paperwork to that idea, and most of the paperwork on your shelf is a suggestion wearing the costume of a rule. Learn the seams. Learn the fats. Learn the codes. Throw out less and know exactly why when you do. If this was useful, subscribe so the next one finds you, and tell me in the comments which food you want pulled apart next. Canned tuna, powdered milk, or something in your cupboard you've never trusted.